Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining. I can still see the numbers are creeping up, so we still have a few joiners coming in. I am just going to be going over some quick housekeeping information and introduce my fellow panelists today. So if you are joining, don't worry, you haven't missed anything yet. So I am very, very delighted to have you all here for today's webinar, where we are going to be discussing strategies for successful update testing, as well as sharing our best practice guidance for testing during this update window. We really do have a fantastic session lined up for you today, including 3 very special guests. But first, let me introduce myself, and I'm going to cover off some quick housekeeping information while everyone is making themselves comfortable. I'm Kerry Rusak, and I head up product marketing here at Kainos, looking specifically at the area of Workday automated testing, Smart Test. If you do have any questions during this webinar today, we have a Q&A panel. I'm sure you're all very familiar with it now. Please submit your questions throughout today's session. We're going to try and come to as many questions as we possibly can towards the end of the session, but we will also be answering questions live during the session if we can quickly get to it. So please add as many questions as you can to the panel. We'd love to try and help as much as possible. At the end of today's session, you're also going to receive a very short survey. I would really appreciate if you could complete this. It's only going to take a couple of minutes, but your feedback is so valuable in helping us to improve these sessions each and every time we do this. And most importantly, we want to hear from you. We have about 4 polls happening today, so we want to hear your experience and get your feedback throughout the session as well. So we want to make this as much about you as it is about what we're sharing today. So now that housekeeping is entirely out of the way, let's kick things off and meet our guests. The first guest I have is Carol Wan. She is the HRIS Functional Manager at First American. Carol has been working in the HR ERP platform since 2005, so she has lots of experience with implementations, having starting off in consulting before moving into the HRIS functional consulting. Carol has been working in the Workday ecosystem for a year and a half now, so she's about 3 biannual releases, so lots of advice to share with us. Hey Carol, great to have you here today.
Hi Carrie, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining. And also joining from First American today is her colleague, Jessica Harnett. She is the Senior HRIS Project Manager. Jessica has been in First American for 7.5 years now. She was originally brought in for their Workday implementation in 2017. She has over 14 years experience in people platforms and has worked on lots of different platforms, including Workday. So she is going to be sharing her valuable insights with us today. Hey, Jessica.
Hi, thanks, Carrie, for having us.
It's really great to have you. And last but by no means least, I am also joined today by Tom Milliken. Tom is our Solutions Director here at Kainos, and he has spent more than 12 years in the Workday ecosystem. 10 of those were directly spent with Workday, so Tom has been a part of a large number of biannual updates. So we are in very, very good hands. Thanks for joining us today, Tom.
Hey, Kerry, thanks. Great, delighted to be here. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And don't be shy when it comes to questions around the content. As Kerry mentioned, the Q&A panel is there for a reason. Feel free to drop anything in there. And I'll be answering questions throughout the presentation today, as well as a block of time at the end. So look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Tom. So before we catch up with Carol and Jessica and really get into our guide, let's have a quick refresher on a couple of terms. So industry-leading solutions like Workday have processes, security, and settings that are often going to intersect with one another. This means that sometimes a change in one area can have a knock-on effect elsewhere within your configuration. Workday are going to thoroughly test its software before its releases, and every customer, everyone on this call is going to have a unique configuration, and the responsibility is really on you to ensure that there's no impact whenever changes are moved directly into production. It's the big 6 monthly updates. I'm sure that's why you've all joined today, because it's going to be starting in the next few days, and this represents the next full version of Workday. And I think it's fair to say they're significant in scope. The biannual update window is a really exciting time for all Workday customers. Inside those 5 weeks, the focus for you is going to be to evaluate those new features on offer. You're going to want to be working with your business partners and sponsors to roll out that new functionality that's going to help drive positive change within your business. You're also going to want to test your existing configuration to ensure that the update is not going to have any negative impact on your business continuity. 5 weeks, I think, always seems like a really generous amount of time, but that time goes really fast. Most of the Workday customers that we talk to tell us that they spend the vast majority of their time completing regression testing on their configuration. And that's just to make sure that everything is still working with the new release, rather than exploring and rolling out those numerous new and exciting features that Workday have on offer.
And Carrie, it's not just those big updates twice a year. On a weekly basis, Workday is putting new code into your production and sandbox environments to include things like bug fixes on a regular basis, but also any and all new code that has been tested on Workday's end in support of the new releases that might be coming up. Additionally, there's things that you are doing, things like mergers and acquisitions, divestitures, major reorgs, business as usual type stuff. And all of these can affect your the stability of your Workday system. Regression testing to catch any and all new changes made by either you or by Workday is critical. Changes occur regularly during that course of business as well. Things happen on a regular basis, either by you and your team directly, or perhaps other members of the broader team throughout the world. So those things need to be tested on a regular basis as well.
Tom, we have mentioned regression testing a few times already, and I was just wondering if you could refresh everyone on exactly what that means.
Absolutely. Regression testing is really all about stabilization, keeping your Workday environment stable and headed in the right direction in a positive sort of way. It's regular tests of your business processes, reports, dashboards, and other areas such as performance and usability as well, just to make sure that everything stays, as I mentioned, stable. It's about finding any and all defects before they impact your user population and correcting them in an ongoing fashion.
Tom, thanks so much for sharing. I think it's really good just to keep a refresher at the very top. As we're going with the biannual update as our top of mind, let's take a look at why testing during the update window is so important. So when the preview window starts, Workday are going to update your sandbox and your sandbox preview in preparation for testing. It's at this point a direct copy of your production configuration is going to be sent to both of these tenants. Workday use the business process framework, which is really powerful as it's going to enable you to configure and subsequently maintain those core process flows within Workday product lines to connect your people, applications, and services, meaning, as I said, your configuration is completely personal to your business. Your organization's data, which is your people, your finances, operations, and so much more, will also be synchronized across your sandbox and sandbox preview. And it's at this point that your production and sandbox will share the same code base. The only difference here is that your sandbox preview tenant, however, will feature the upcoming new Workday 2024R1 release. And that's exactly why you need to test to compare any of these changes. Two people who know exactly why testing throughout the update window and beyond is important are our special guests, Jessica and Carol from First America. Before we talk about your experience with the update window, Jessica and Carol, it would be really great if you could tell us a little bit about First American for anybody who doesn't know them and why First American chose Workday.
Sure, that's a really great question. So there was a lot of different reasons why we wanted a global system and moving to Workday. Really having one system that can bring all our employees to one place to create efficiencies and eliminate all the feeds and silos. So up until Workday, we had multiple HR systems, lots of different feeds, hundreds of integrations, everything was decentralized. So we spent a lot of time configuring those systems, and we really wanted to have an opportunity to simplify our process, make it easier for our employees. And with Workday being a cloud application, it's always up to date. There's always something new, and it's really easy to configure and to help us meet not only current needs, but also our future needs as well.
Jessica, thanks. So obviously decentralization is something that lots of people talk about before they get Workday. How did you plan a rollout for Workday across your business?
So we started with our largest population in the US. And then as soon as we launched the US and got through our hypercare, we quickly moved on to launching in India and Canada. So in 2017 went the US, and then April 2019, India, and 2 months later, Canada.
So by my calculations, that would mean you've been through about 13 biannual releases and 2 phase X deployments.
That's correct. And with all of that, we also have been introducing new modules along the way. So we went live with learning in 2022, and we just went live with help and candidate engagement.
Yes, and last year we turned on interview management, and within the next few weeks we plan to turn on Workday journeys.
Yeah, so we've definitely turned on a few big modules and items over the past couple of years as well.
It's a really impressive roadmap. It's amazing to see your growth with Workday and those changes that you're making. So with all that going on, I would love to know your experience that you have whenever it comes to update testing and any challenges that you have with that.
Well, now that we have Smart Test, it's been a huge help. It gives us the speed and confidence with all the release testing. Before that, everything was manual. So it was a really large coordinated effort. Since our HRS team they're not the ones that are actually in Workday doing the transactions day in and day out. We had to coordinate with all our centers of excellence in India, Canada, and the US to find testers. We also had to pull in our recruiting and payroll teams in order to, with each release. And when you're already really busy, it's a kind of a big ask, and it's hard to find people to do that. So we really limited our testing to about 75 to 80 scenarios that we would run through each release, but that really only skimmed the surface. Our focus really always, and our team hears this all the time, is make sure nothing breaks. So we were testing all of the key business processes, and we would try to do some light integration and payroll testing. But since we don't have a dedicated testing team, our complete focus for those entire 5 weeks was regression testing and identifying any changes that could potentially impact all of our employees. So a good example of that is when the new Workday Today homepage came out. That was a really big deal for us. We had to update all of our job aids, any videos, and then we had to create also supplemental job aids to help our employees with the Workday update. That took us the entire 5 weeks. So anything that was kind of outside of our do not break philosophy, we couldn't get to. We couldn't check any of the opt-ins. We couldn't even look at anything that was part of an automatic release, but required some kind of configuration in order for it to work. We essentially, at that point, just put all those things on the roadmap. But as soon as we got through the release and made sure everything was okay, our team was then immediately pulled into other projects, and then boom, another release was here.
6 months does go fast. If we thought 5 weeks went fast, 6 months definitely does go fast. It's really impressive what you've been able to achieve with your roadmap so far. And I think you raised a really good point, Jessica, around pulling in recruiters and payroll teams to try and help you with that testing throughout the preview window. I'd love to hear from everybody in the session if we could potentially launch a poll and find out how many people you're pulling in for your preview window testing. Are you pulling in maybe less than 5? Is it between 6 and 10? Are you pulling in, oh my gosh, lots of people are saying we're at 15 already. So yeah, oh my gosh, there's so many people involved in this. Wow, so many votes coming through right now. Guys, thank you so much. It's between 6 and 10 and 15 plus. I'll just share the results. Yeah, so 15 plus is 35% of the people on here today, and between 6 and 10. I'd be so interested to know if they were the same mix as yourself, Jessica. Would you guys mind sharing, how many people would you have had involved within the release testing in First America before you had Smart Test?
Yeah, I can take this one. So before we had Smart Test, we actually had more than 25 people working on just testing alone during the preview window.
Wow, Carol, that does seem like so many people who are involved in something 10 weeks throughout the year. Really appreciate you guys sharing where you're at. And I think it's a really good time to jump into our guide and share a little bit about how we can help throughout the update window. So don't worry if you're new, we're going to try and cover off as many top and helpful tips and best practice whenever it comes to testing Workday throughout this update window. So I hope by now you've had a chance to look at a plan, but don't worry, it's not too late. Tom, given your expertise, could you share any advice on how everyone joining this webinar today could focus their time during the update window?
Yeah, absolutely. Developing an updated update test strategy really helps you define what you're going to plan on testing and why. When deciding what to test, we recommend a risk-based approach. And for me, there are really three major overarching themes. Your first priority should be focus your testing efforts on those high risk and high impact areas within Workday, the ones where all employees perhaps are being affected. Successful update, it really boils down to two major key objectives. You really want to make sure that everything your Workday set up that you can do now, you can do after the new version is available. And I think Jessica hit on that as well. In the early days when they were manually testing, they were just trying to keep the boat afloat. But for example, you're looking at things like step conditions, eligibility rules, validations. Are they all working properly? Are they integrated into your business processes and working the way that they should? If not, you're really going to need to figure out what changed, how to fix it, and get it back to working the way that it's supposed to work. Another issue in that whole risk impact prioritization idea is around negative testing. Whenever I'm talking to a client who is doing manual testing now, I never hear anything about negative testing. They're generally talking about making sure that things that used to work still work. They're not looking into whether or not things that shouldn't work aren't working, right? So we want to make sure that folks who have a certain access have that same access after and not affected by the update and giving them granting them more access, or the things that shouldn't work don't work. Secondly, third-party integrations, and this is a critical piece of any testing strategy during one of these major releases. Really, it starts with a comprehensive inventory of all the integrations throughout your Workday installation. Anything in, anything out of the Workday system needs to be tested completely. I would recommend we test these early. Anything that needs fixing within those integrations may take a little bit of time and resources. It's critical that your Workday system can send and receive all of that data accurately. And thirdly, any of the automatic features that are coming with the new release. A small percentage of all the new features that are coming out in any Workday release are turned on automatically, right? You want to make sure that any of those aren't going to adversely impact any of the configurations that you've already got set up. It's important to note also that, with the releases, the other new features are going to be delivered in a turned off fashion. So you've got some time to figure out whether or not they're going to be impacting things. But those automatic ones, you want to take a good look at those right out of the gate.
Thanks for sharing. So how would you then plan for success?
Yeah, absolutely. Success in any complex endeavor like this one starts with a plan, right? A good test plan maps out the 4 W's, that being what is the scope of your testing? When, what does the schedule look like, and how are we prioritizing all the items on that schedule? Where, what tenants are we using? For instance, are we using your preview tenant in comparison to your sandbox tenant or another tenant that you might have? And who from a staffing perspective is going to be taking on these testing responsibilities? And as Jessica mentioned, sometimes it can be hard in a manual scenario to find all the right people at the right time. So a good plan documents the following and should absolutely be shared with all of the key stakeholders. What are the risks you're looking to mitigate, right? And this is going to come from your strategy as well. We're going to risk, is it regard to payroll? Is it regard to data security and setup, things along those lines? The strategy upfront will define that. What specifically are you going to test to mitigate those risks, right? So for instance, if you think about R2 in the US comes toward the second half of the year, and generally right around the time of open enrollment for benefits. So you want to make sure that benefits eligibility and all of those formulas and all of those processes are operating optimally at that particular point in time. But what processes will you test to mitigate that risk? Oftentimes it's all of the biggies, right? It's your hire, it's your termination, transfer, promotion, maybe create position. What about changes to personal information or change job where employees are going from part-time to full-time or vice versa? All those should be taken into account. What are the specific scenarios that might be unique to you? And what number of individual tests are you going to put against those scenarios to make sure that you get the depth of coverage that you need to make sure that things are running the way they should. What about staff assignments for all the various test areas, the subject matter experts and anyone else who might be involved in, for instance, compensation or benefits or core HR? And also your test schedule. We're going to specify which tests are going to be taken on which dates, in which order, by which people, and why. Also remember, it's rare to run a test cycle and find nothing, right? You're going to find stuff. You're going to need to include time to run the initial test, plus any additional time to investigate any defects that you might find. Logging and resolving all of these, tracking them from beginning to end, critical, but also retesting those as well is going to be just as important. So you're going to want to build into contingency into every test cycle, into that schedule of yours. Make sure that you've got that buffer that you might need.
Tom, thanks so much. I think you've raised quite a lot of good points there. If you're thinking about planning for those 5 weeks and what that plan for success looks like over those 5 weeks, Tom, could you share what that looked like?
Yeah, so as you've already mentioned, that update window lasts for 5 weeks. And believe me, it goes by a lot faster than you think it would. There are key areas you're going to want to test, and these range from your third-party integrations, as I mentioned, through all of your critical business processes. So week 1, from my advice, focus on those critical foundational items and those that may take some time to correct if you find any defects. Integrations, right? These are going to take time, effort, and you're going to need to probably get into a queue with your development team in order to correct any defects that might be found in your integrations, either inbound or outbound. Security, right? Your security configurations. There's not much worse than releasing an ERP system with security defects where people can potentially see or do things that they shouldn't be able to do. And for all of us here in America, and payroll is dear and deep to my heart, living in Pennsylvania, like integrations, anything that you find here may require time and more testing to make sure that those things are correct. So that's my week 1. Week 2 is where I'm going to begin to test all of the BPs with a focus on those most commonly used ones throughout your organization, as well as any that you may have created that are unique to you. Those are your hire terms, transfers, promotions, and so forth, just to make sure that we're testing all of those from end to end. And test those BPs in addition to continued security and integration work. So that some of these are going to bleed into the second week as well. Weeks 3 and 4, right? We're going to do more continued BP testing. We're going to test reports and dashboards, continue any work on integrations that might be outstanding. And most importantly, during all of this process, logging those issues in some sort of tracking tool. When kind of blending weeks 4 and 5, this is your final testing and issue resolution. By now, you should have a really good handle and a really good executable list of things that you're going to have to attack in order to make sure everything's running the way that they should. I recommend at the end of week 4, a team meeting to triage any outstanding issues that might be on that list, make people accountable for individual items, make teams accountable for things that require a cross-domain expertise in order to make sure that they run perfectly, and add resources where necessary, right? Particularly in the areas of integrations. I know I'm beating the hammer, drumming with the hammer on this one, but I can't express enough how important they are, number one, and how much time it might take in order to correct anything that you might find. And from my personal experience, the 3 most important things in any testing strategy are documentation, documentation, and documentation. Track issues, share them with the team, make them available either through a testing tool or Google Sheets or something along those lines, and track everything from its beginning, its inception, right through into resolution.
That's amazing. I think tracking, I think we've really got it. We need documentation and tracking for planning.
And there's one other thing that I would recommend as well. It's a good idea, I think, to ask Workday to copy your production data down to your sandbox preview as well toward the end, right? The end of week 4, beginning of week 5. Just so you have a fresh data set that you can actually test against. It gives you one final chance to confirm all of that information, that everything is up to date, your configurations are great, your data is performing as expected on that new release, and just give you a little bit more peace of mind as you complete that 5-week window.
Perfect, Tom. So everybody's got their documentation, they're tracking everything centrally. How would you tackle defects?
I'm sorry, why would I what?
Is it maybe my Irish accent, Tom, that's thrown you off?
I know.
So I'm just saying that everyone has got their they're tracking everything. They've got their documentation. How would you recommend that people tackle defects?
Yes. Anytime that we're using a tracking tool and tracking defects is making sure that every one of those defects that's been identified has somebody, a test lead, to make sure that it is complete. And that test lead can bring in additional people, additional resources in order to make sure that it's being handled. And then on a regular basis throughout the 5 weeks, make sure that we have a meeting that comes together where we get everybody in the room. Okay, where are we on this one? Where are we on that one? Just to make sure that things are progressing the way they should, because that target date, that the 5 week window is going to come at you really fast. So I think a comprehensive approach and collaboration are the way to go.
Thanks, Tom. Another question, Tom, that we always get asked is about new features. It's such an exciting time for people coming into this window because they're going to be looking at new features. And we've covered a lot about regression testing to make sure that nothing's broken. Jessica said it, they have a do not break philosophy within First American. So what advice would you give anyone who is asking the question, do I focus on the new features that are coming, or am I to focus on regression testing?
Yeah, I think there are a number of areas that you should consider when making this type of decision. One, really, what are your business priorities for your organization? Are you in a stable state, or are you in a state of flux? And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in a way of, there are mergers and acquisitions going on. There's a major reorg that's underway as well. Maybe there's a divestiture. There are a lot of things can affect the availability of important people as you approach through the regression or the testing as a part of any new release. So if that's the case, then perhaps regression testing is your focus, right? The great thing is that, all of the new features, as I mentioned, are turned off. You've got plenty of time. You can get to them later, do your research, fit them into your schedule, and release things whenever you feel comfortable doing so. But what about your technology roadmap? Perhaps did a brainstorm item of yours make it to the new release? I'm sure everybody knows what a brainstorm is. You've got a great idea. Wish Workday could do this, and you can go out and put it in there, and Workday will work it into their roadmap if there are enough folks that are interested in it. So if that's the case, then be sure to add that specific item to your plan. Make sure that it's got the resources and the time in order to implement that, so that you can roll out that thing that you absolutely needed. And what about team availability? This is a people effort as much as it is a tech effort. SMEs could be otherwise busy, right? Maybe a great time to focus on that regression testing versus new features. You're going to need their input, right? You're going to want their input for any and all of the new features that might be coming out within their specific area of expertise. So at that time, maybe regression testing is a good approach.
Tom, thanks so much. Really appreciate you sharing all that with me. I think it'd be a really good idea, now that we're thinking about new features and what's coming, to share with everybody how you're going to find those new features. So let's dive into the What's New guide. So to find the What's New guide, what you're going to want to do is you're going to log into Workday and you're going to search What's New in Workday, and you're going to find this report. You're going to be given a number of options. I would recommend checking the box for enabling the functional area, and you're also going to want to select this release 2024R1. Click OK, and you're going to be presented with this report. And in the top right-hand corner, you're going to see a button to export the document, and you're going to want to go straight ahead to downloading that. And then whenever you download it, you can put it into a format like this. So once we download and export it into Excel, you can add in these filters, which you see at the top. The first area I want to draw your attention to is the setup effort. So green are the automatically available features. Ready or not, they're coming. You need to look at them first. Yellow are going to be features that require setup, and red are going to need some professional services. I would also recommend looking at testing and training impacts. So is there maybe going to be something that's going to have no impact on your team? Is there maybe going to be features that might need to update your training materials or require additional testing? You can also take a snapshot pivot table of all the items and account by functional area, and this is going to let you determine which areas you want to address that are applicable to your organization. So over those 5 weeks throughout the preview window, you can recheck that count to make sure that things haven't changed. This is an ever-evolving process within Workday, so you really want to make sure you don't miss anything. And lastly, what's on the screen right now, throughout that 5-week preview, you may want to present to your business sponsors, your business partners, where you're at throughout the process, so they can really get a feel of how many new items are coming up within the release, as well as what you might want to implement within the future. This can just be presented in a chart format, and this can be used through functional groups. So you can see where the biggest changes are coming to help build out your own Workday roadmap. And this is going to help your sponsors and your business partners get an idea of the areas that are going to be most affected. And then your goal is going to be moving these through the research, test, discussion, and implementation. So you're going to know exactly what it is that's coming. Of course, with our Smart Test tool, you are not going to need to worry about any of the automatically available features. So the areas that I've just highlighted in green. So let's take a look at Smart Test in action. So what we're seeing here is Smart Test in the background, behind the scenes. Essentially, this is so you and your team can get on with those exciting projects that are going to help shift the needle within your business and for your people. So this is an example of a business process test, for example. So the tool is running these tests in the same way that any one of your testers would, but rather than someone going in and opening a browser, connecting it to Sandbox, Smart is doing this all automatically. It's going to proxy in as Logan McNeil or Teresa Serrano, which is the next step in the process, and it's going to add that data at all of the relevant steps of that journey. Throughout the update, this can be really time consuming for your SMEs to have to do all this, but at a click of a button, Smart is going to execute all of these scenarios. And the real power of Smart is not just one test. The power is when they kick off an entire test run, Smart is able to execute all of these tests concurrently at one time. So now you're going to see something that looks pretty familiar, that we've seen this right at the start of the presentation. So when the preview window starts, you're going to click and Workday is going to update your Sandbox and your Sandbox preview tenant in preparation for testing. A copy of your production configuration is going to be sent to both of these tenants. And as we have noted, your data is also going to be synchronized across your Sandbox and Sandbox preview. The only difference, like I said, is that that code base is going to be different. It's going to be the Workday 2024R1 release. And this is exactly where Smart Test can come in and take away all that pressure from you and your teams. Because of our extensive relationship with Workday, we get early access to the pre-releases and weekly changes, so your test scripts are always up to date. Smart Test will be testing your key business processes, your integrations, payroll, reports, security configurations, and it's going to execute all of them simultaneously in both tenants and compare those outputs for any differences. We have a dedicated team of Workday and Smart Test experts that are going to help scope, build, and maintain your specific testing requirements, as well as being on hand to help triage and analyze any issues, not just throughout the update window, but all year round. This means that your time is going to be focused on the issues that are arising, rather than the other tests that you're running, they're passing and they're not causing you any concern. So that's going to give you more confidence within your configuration and it's going to help you as expected, because you're going to have more time dedicated to the new features that are coming up within the release. Remember, it's at this time, at this point, the only difference between your Sandbox and Sandbox preview tenants is the Workday 2024R1 code base. So if Smart does find any differences, these are caused by the changes that Workday have made in the upcoming release. And I want to show you very quickly 2 examples of how Smart Test can do this. So if we're looking at Sandbox and Sandbox preview, for example, this is Smart Test integration comparison functionality. So here we're testing one of our key integrations in both our Sandbox and Sandbox preview. Now, one of the key advantages of using automation is that we can, at a click of a button, we're going to let Smart Test do all the hard work. And here we can see that this is telling us that there's something wrong. It resulted in a non-match, which you can see at the top of the screen. And if we scroll down further, we're going to see a side-by-side comparison showing us exactly where the problems are. On the left, you're going to see the integration output file that was generated by Sandbox. And on the right, you're going to see the same output file that was generated on Sandbox preview. Smart Test is highlighted in red here, that some data that is happening in Sandbox is not appearing in Sandbox preview. This is pretty key data. It's covering the identification data for our employees. Remember, because automation has been used to trigger these events at exactly the same time, when both tenants are in sync, we should expect to see the same outputs. And this is helping to highlight the issue that's come from the upcoming release within Workday. And this is what's going to require your immediate attention. And as well as ensuring that your integrations are working as expected throughout the update that's completed. Tom mentioned that one of the key areas that you're also going to want to look at in the beginning is payroll. So I just want to show you a very quick payroll comparison as well. Remember, at the very start of the release, the only difference is the code base. So if Smart Test is performing these tests, you should see the same results. So let's take a look at a payroll comparison as well. So again, if we look at this preview, this is an example of how easy it is to spot any issues. This is a test that has been run against your existing pay groups, and Smart Test is highlighting that there's a variance within the calculations in our tenant. And it's clear to say everyone likes to get paid, and the testing of payroll results across both Sandbox and Sandbox Preview can be a really daunting task for everyone. But with Smart Test, at the click of a button, you're letting this automation run your pay calculations for all your pay groups and both tenants, and it's going to compare those results and let you know if there's anything that you need to investigate. So now we've had a very quick look at Smart Test. I would love to call Jessica and Carol back to have a little look at how automation has helped you throughout this update window. Carol, can I ask, what sort of impact has that experience had for you throughout the update window?
Well, now that we have the Smart Test, that whole manual process is gone. We don't have to rely on any of our COEs to do any of the testing anymore. The Smart Test tool takes care of this and identifies any issues beforehand.
And if I can just add one more thing, before Smart Test, we had to do a lot of data setup and preparation. So having Smart Test now saves us hundreds of hours and then some. And that's just counting what we could do at the time, and not all the things now that we can do now that we have Smart Test.
Yeah, and Jessica, I would also add that, one of the really great things that we can do now is that side-by-side payroll comparison and integration, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That just wasn't possible before. We needed to have a whole testing team in order to do that. So all those concerns we had about anything breaking, we just don't have those anymore. Smart Test takes care of all of that for us.
Jessica, thanks so much. I know you shared how the update window looked before you had Smart Test, but Carol, could you tell me how the last year has been, and what does the update window look like for you now?
Well, now we can spend the first week doing the comparison testing and running through the normal scenarios that we have set up ahead of go live.
Amazing. So it's really exactly what Smart Test was intended to do. It really was designed to help you streamline your workday and really help free you up throughout that time of change throughout the release windows. I suppose my last question for yourselves, Carol and Jessica, is what's been the impact? You're obviously able to implement lots of changes. Now you have Smart Test. These release cycles are really exciting for you. So what's been the impact for First American?
Well, I would say now that we have Smart Tests, we're able to respond more quickly to change. We're able to focus more on the other competing priorities. And now in the release cycles, we're not spending the entire 5 weeks just testing and testing. It really frees up the team's bandwidth to automate other processes and be more proactive versus reactive.
And because our team is always working closely with their COEs to be able to see things that they're asking for. So this gives them the time to really look through the brainstorms through the community and bring those items to the COEs and start getting their feedback earlier so we can focus on what I call the shiny new toys that will improve the workday experience for all of our people. And then really
Amazing.
and then just one other thing, just like given the nature of our business, we're also always being audited. So it's just not our HRIS team, but that loves Smart Test. It's wonderful for our compliance team too, because it's all automated, it's more comprehensive and consistent, and it provides us all the information that we need around security. So we can show them that not only we're doing the testing and that we we also have a tool that comes in to make sure everything works the way we're expecting it to.
Jessica, Carol, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing all of your expertise and advice today. I think it would be a really good idea to jump to our Q&A. I can see there are lots of questions coming in. So Tom, I'm going to bring you back into our Q&A as well. I can see you've answered some questions in the background as well. There's a few questions in here. I'm going to answer really quickly. I've got a couple of questions about will the slides be shared after? Absolutely, we will share everything, and even slides that are animated, I will put still screenshots in it and make sure you can read everything. So don't worry, the slides are going to be shared. Yes, this recording is going to be available online as well afterwards. So yes, we have a wealth of information. I've seen there's also another question from someone asking if we have any beginner training classes. We actually have a Workday update testing hub on Kainos.com as well. So you can go back and see all of this information as well as any of our guides. And we also have a really useful frequently asked questions section there as well. So yes, of course, you're more than welcome to reach out to any of us as well throughout today's session. But let me see, they were just the first questions that were coming to mind. So let me see if I can see a couple of questions. Tom, one of the questions that has come in is about use of tracking tools. So Andrew has asked, have you any useful tools that you could advise that would be good for tracking testing and documentation?
Yeah, there are a number of different approaches that customers are taking right now, depending on, of course, your complexity and the level of testing that you're doing across your entire Workday enterprise. Some are using Excel, where they're providing a unique identifier for each and every one of the issues that they've found. You know, HR 001, FINS 007, something along those lines to be able to track those things. And they'll do it in Google Sheets or somewhere where the entire testing team can have access to things. Other organizations, and you may have one of these tools in-house already, are using things like Atlassian's Jira or ServiceNow. Many times customers are using that for other aspects of the employee experience. For instance, logging a ticket because they're having issues getting access to an application within their own environment and getting it down onto their laptop. So oftentimes those types of tools can be used as well, and they're great because they can age particular items that are ticketed. They can be assigned to particular individuals. They can be tracked both from inception all the way through to resolution so that you've got a good idea of exactly where you are in testing all of the different aspects of your Workday system. So, and there are other tools that are out there at every price point to be able to track these sorts of things from a project management standpoint or an issue tracking perspective. So have a look out there and see what suits your need.
Perfect. Thanks, Tom. I'm trying to also respond to some questions. I've got two questions coming in of a very similar vein. When you asked about who configures the test scenarios in Smart Tests, someone asked if who updates the test scripts in Smart Tests. We have a testing team, a gold team who will provide you with an entire service. So the test scripts are always up to date, and we manage that all within Smart Tests. So you could just run the tests at any time that you wanted. Jessica, one question that has come in for you is if you could share any best practice. You've talked about having testing across like your payroll people helping you to test, your recruiters helping you to test. One person has asked for any best practice across testing multiple test streams.
Well, it's I guess my advice is just a highly coordinated effort. So oftentimes it's when we would do this, we really focus on kind of the end-to-end testing. So it's just a really kind of well-documented plan where, you know, when we're kind of testing just across the different work streams, that we would start with kind of our recruiting team at the very beginning of our process, move to the HCM team, and then all the way down to payroll and down to integrations. So it's all about timing. That is really kind of our our approach. And the nice thing is that that's kind of before we had Smart Test. Now Smart Test does everything for us. So we just get an output and a report at the end, and it's beautiful, and it tells us the things that we need to look at and things that are different. But prior to that, it was very much like this week is going to be recruiting, and then the next week's going to be HCM, just to allow people enough time to do it. But then we can also watch the full end-to-end testing. Hopefully I answered that question the way you wanted
Jessica,
it to.
no. Thank you so much. That's amazing. Tom, one question for you, and I'll get back into answering some of the questions online here. Another question is: a customer is currently live. They've got HCM and recruiting, but they're going to implement payroll. Any advice for how they manage the testing process for being live with some features, but also implementing payroll as well?
Yeah, I think that that's not a unique situation for a lot of Workday customers. I know quite a few who went live on either Fins or HCM or both prior to actually adding payroll. So really, it's just an added component to your testing overall strategy, right? We want to make sure that we've got all the right people from your side as well as our side in order to build the appropriate tests in order to verify all of your configurations on an ongoing basis. So it's really a very much similar approach that we would take. However, you're going to have, obviously the stabilization pieces for your HCM financial side of the house, but a much more targeted approach in identifying, scoping, and building the tests necessary to properly test your payroll configurations.
Thanks, Tom. Another question I have in here from Sam. Sam has asked, do we test Workday security? I know someone else had asked that question as well. I think I've got back to you. Yes, we absolutely test security. That's absolutely something we can do. And what we can do is we can schedule a demo for anybody who would like to see anything specific. I would love to show you everything that we can do with Smart Test. We have only scratched the surface today. So I absolutely would love to show you anything else that we have. As we're running near the end of today's session, guys, thank you so much for all the questions. I am loving seeing them coming in, and we will get back to absolutely everybody. And if there is anything more, I'm just trying to get on top of them. But if there's any more questions that you have, please do send them in. And if there's anything for Jessica or Carol, we'll share them with you as well afterwards. So we'll get answers. Before we finish today's session, I think it would be really good to hear the top tips just to summarize today. So Jessica, Carol, Tom, I am handing the reins over to you. What would be top tips for success for Workday 2024R1, sorry.
So one of the things with the release is that we can recommend is really utilize that Workday community. Look at the release notes, the articles, the videos that Workday produces, even the comments from other people. That's something you're 100% going to want to do. Also, make sure to check that What's New report regularly. It's not one of those things you download once and then you're done. You want to go ahead and download it again, maybe even multiple times, because there's some things that are pulled and changed at the very, very last minute. I mean, that's why they say safe harbor all the time, because it can change right up until that release goes in.
Right. And I would say prioritize your most used transactions, the things that you do most, like what's essential and impacts employees. Anything that impacts the employee is critical, so you can understand any differences that you may need to communicate.
And for me, I would say it would be to test early and often. I think I'm going to have bumper stickers and T-shirts made up with that slogan on there, just to make sure that folks really, truly understand that, the earlier you get to these testing, particularly in the areas that are critical to business continuity, testing early and often absolutely can change your life and make sure that things go smoothly in the end.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I think that's the best advice that I can give, is to run your integration and payroll before you start putting any sort of functional testing into the tenant, so hires and terms. You want to go ahead and do that payroll and integration testing first at the very beginning of the release when you refresh, because that's the closest that preview tenant will be to your production data. Carol, anything I'm missing or anything else?
Yeah, maybe just I'd like to add that it's good to have a plan where you have that cross-functional team with formalized responsibilities for things like impact testing, impact analysis and testing, and that's able to coordinate with your stakeholders to prioritize items and schedule production release dates.
Jessica, Carol, Tom, thank you so much for joining me. Jessica and Carol, I just want to thank you so much for sharing the First American story. Hearing a little bit more about your Workday journey has been absolutely amazing. Tom, thanks for joining me. Lovely to have you on this webinar. We will meet again on another one. I hope you all really enjoyed today's session, and I want to thank you all for your amazing engagement on the polls, on the chat, and the Q&A. I really appreciate all of those questions that have come in today. And we are going to get back to absolutely everyone who has sent us a question. So please don't worry, we are going to get back to you. We are just running so short of time today. If only we could make these longer. But thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. And I hope you have a really good day. Wishing you all the very best for the Workday 2024 R1 release. Thank you very much.